My name is Claire Merritt. I'm 33 years old, and I'm an estate attorney, which means I spend my days making sure people's last wishes are honored, their legacies protected, their families respected even after they're gone. Ironic, isn't it? 7 months ago, my sister Dana got married at the Lakeview Country Club in a ceremony that cost $187,000. My parents paid for every penny of it. The flowers, the dress, the 6-tier cake, the open bar for 120 guests. They stood up at that reception looking like the most generous parents alive. What 120 people in that room didn't know, what I had discovered just 4 days earlier, was that the money came from my grandmother's estate. The estate she left to me. Every dollar of the $340,000 my grandmother Eleanor Merritt had carefully saved over 71 years, every board foot of the lake house she had promised me with her own trembling hand, had been redirected. Quietly. Precisely. With a forged signature on a document that looked almost exactly like the real thing. Almost. My parents had one stroke of terrible luck. They didn't know their overlooked, underestimated younger daughter had spent the past 8 years becoming one of the sharpest probate attorneys in the state of North Carolina. They didn't know I had seen forged wills before. They didn't know I had a mentor who had kept the originals. And they had absolutely no idea what was coming when the best man handed my father that microphone. Before I continue, if this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see every single one of your messages, and it means more than I can say. Now let me take you back to the summer I turned 8, when everything in my family was decided, and I drew the short straw. The Merritt family ran on a simple formula. Dana was the son. I was whatever the sun didn't reach. My sister was 3 years older than me, and from the time I could understand language, I understood the hierarchy. Dana was bright and sociable, the kind of child adults instinctively like. She remembered names, she laughed at the right moments. She had my mother's cheekbones and my father's easy confidence. When I was 8, my parents threw Dana a birthday party with a bouncy castle and a pony. When I turned 8, my mother made a grocery store cake and forgot the candles. She remembered halfway through the singing and stuck 2 leftover birthday candles from the year before into the frosting. One of them was already half melted. I remember staring at those 2 mismatched candles thinking I had done something wrong, something that made me less deserving of the full number. I just didn't know what it was yet. My father, Robert, was a civil engineer. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who showed love through practicality, fixing your car, making sure the roof didn't leak. He loved Dana openly, demonstratively, the way parents love the child who reflects their best qualities back at them. With me, there was always a slight hesitation, like he was trying to remember what I was interested in before speaking to me. My mother, Margaret, was more transparent about her preferences. Not cruel, she would have been horrified to be called cruel, but transparent in the way people are when they've never had to examine their own behavior. She enrolled Dana in piano, in dance, and art. I got to watch from the back seat. When I asked, at 10 years old, if I could take piano too, she said they couldn't afford 2 lessons. I later learned that wasn't true. They could have afforded 2. They just didn't want to. At 10, I stopped asking. There were specific moments that settled like sediment. At 12, I won the regional spelling bee. My name was in the local paper. My mother put the clipping in a drawer. Dana's volleyball trophy lived on the mantelpiece for 6 years. At 16, I scored a 1490 on the SAT on my first attempt. My father said that was good and asked what was for dinner. When Dana scored 1182 years later, my parents took the whole family to Applebee's to celebrate. At 18, I received a full academic scholarship to UNC Chapel Hill. My mother said that was convenient. Dana's partial scholarship to a smaller school came with a new laptop, a new car, and a $12,000 contribution toward tuition. I told myself it didn't matter. I had the scholarship. I had the path. I had everything I needed. What I didn't have was the one thing no scholarship can cover, the feeling that the people who were supposed to root for you actually were. The one person who always rooted for me was my grandmother Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor was my father's mother, a small, sharp-eyed woman who had grown up poor in eastern Tennessee and built a life through stubbornness and strategic frugality. She kept a little notebook in her apron pocket where she tracked every expense, every saving, every dollar that moved through her household. She called me her bookkeeper's soul because I was the only grandchild who wanted to look at those notebooks. Dana found them boring. I found them fascinating. Grandma Eleanor and I would sit on the porch of her lake house in Brevard, North Carolina, drinking sweet tea and watching the herons land on the water. She would tell me about the women she'd watched get erased by their families, daughters who were overlooked, mothers whose sacrifices went unacknowledged, wives who were never truly seen. When I was 22 and starting law school, she took my hand and said something I wrote down that night in my journal. She said, "You're the one who will actually do something, Claire. Don't you let them make you small." I was 26 when she added, "I've taken care of things, sweetheart. You won't have to fight for what's yours." I didn't know exactly what she meant until much later. She died on a Tuesday in October, 3 years ago. 6:47 in the morning. I was in the middle of a deposition when my phone rang. I stepped out into the hallway of a nondescript office building in Charlotte and learned that the one person who had made me feel like I mattered was gone. The room smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. I remember that specifically because it felt wrong that the world could smell so ordinary at that particular moment. The funeral was quiet and strange. My parents handled the arrangements without asking my input. Dana gave the eulogy, which surprised me because Dana and Grandma Eleanor had never been particularly close. But Dana was eloquent, and my mother wanted eloquent, and so that was that. In the weeks after, my father told me the estate was being handled. He said Eleanor had left everything to them, as the surviving family, and they were managing the administration. When I asked to see the will, I was an attorney. It was a reasonable request. He said it was all being handled by the family's accountant, and there was nothing I needed to do. Something small and cold settled in my stomach. I noted it and let it pass. I was grieving. I told myself I was being suspicious for no reason. That was my first mistake. I should have trusted my instincts 7 months earlier. The letter arrived on a Wednesday in March at 9:18 in the morning. I was eating a granola bar at my desk, reviewing a trust modification case, when my paralegal set an envelope in front of me. Return address, Stern and Associates, Asheville, North Carolina. I didn't recognize the firm name at first. I opened it anyway. Inside was a handwritten note on cream stationery, in careful cursive that belonged to someone who had learned to write before computers existed. "Dear Claire," it began. "My name is Harold Stern. I was your grandmother Eleanor Merritt's attorney for 34 years. I am writing because I believe you should know that the will currently on file with the Buncombe County Probate Court is not the will Eleanor Merritt signed in my presence. I have the original. I am 81 years old and in declining health. I would like to make sure this is resolved before I am no longer able to make it so. I believe your grandmother would want the same. Please call at your earliest convenience." I read it twice. Then I sat very still for a long moment, the granola bar forgotten. I called Harold Stern at 9:31 in the morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice thin but precise, the voice of a man who had spent decades being careful with words. He told me that Eleanor had updated her will in September, 14 months before her death. Everything, the lake house in Brevard, the investment accounts totaling $340,000, the jewelry, the contents of the house, had been left to me. Specifically to me. Not to my parents. Not to be split. To me, by name, with a note in the accompanying letter of instruction that said, and I wrote this down as Harold read it, "I am leaving my estate to my granddaughter Claire because she is the one who paid attention, and the one who will understand what this represents." Harold had filed the original will with the court. Then, 2 weeks after Eleanor's death, a different will appeared. A newer one, dated 3 months after the original, purporting to supersede it, leaving everything to my father, Robert Merritt. Harold had been dealing with his own health crisis and only learned about the substitution 3 months later when a colleague mentioned it in passing. By then, the estate had already been administered. The accounts liquidated. The lake house sold. Harold's voice was steady but regretful. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long to reach out. He said Eleanor had told him in their last meeting that she was worried her family would not honor her wishes. She had asked him to keep a certified copy of the original will, sealed and notarized, in his personal files. He had kept it. He wanted me to have it. I drove to Asheville that Saturday morning. Harold Stern met me in the sitting room of his Victorian home, bookshelves on every wall, the smell of old paper and Earl Grey in the air. He was exactly as I had imagined, small, precise, wearing a cardigan despite the warmth. He handed me a manila envelope without ceremony. Inside was the original will, certified, notarized, bearing my grandmother's signature in blue ink. Beneath it, a forensic comparison report from a handwriting expert Harold had already retained, comparing Eleanor's signature on the original to the signature on the filed version. The report was 4 pages long. The conclusion was one sentence. The signature on the filed document is inconsistent with the known samples and indicative of forgery. I sat in Harold's sitting room for a long time. He brought me tea I didn't drink. When I finally looked up, I asked how much the estate had been worth at the time of liquidation. He said the accounts contained $340,000 at the time of Eleanor's death. The lake house sold for $218,000 4 months later. $558,000. I thought about Dana's engagement announcement, which my mother had called me about 6 months ago with barely contained excitement. I thought about the venue she had mentioned, the Lakeview Country Club, one of the most expensive reception spaces in the region. I thought about how my mother had mentioned, casually, that they were handling the wedding costs as a gift to Dana. I thought about who, exactly, had paid for that gift. I drove home and opened my laptop and started building a file. I do this for a living. I pulled the probate court records and compared the filed will to the original Harold had given me. The differences were subtle but damning. The font was marginally different. The original had been typed on Harold's office system. The filed version had been printed on something else, designed to look similar. The notary seal on the filed version belonged to a notary in Asheville who, when I called her office, had no record of witnessing Eleanor Merritt's signature. I pulled the estate financial records. $340,000 in investment accounts, liquidated in November. Proceeds transferred to my father's personal account. The lake house sold in February for $218,000. Proceeds split between my parents. I created a folder on my desktop. I labeled it Eleanor. I saved everything. Then I called my colleague Priya Anand, a forensic accountant I had worked with on an inheritance fraud case 2 years earlier. I sent her photos of the key documents and asked her to trace where the money had gone. She called me back 72 hours later. Her voice had the careful tone of someone delivering difficult news to a professional who could handle it. She said, "Claire, your parents deposited the estate proceeds over 8 months. I can trace withdrawals to a wedding venue deposit, a catering contract, a florist, a photographer. The total traceable to the estate money is approximately $187,000. The rest appears to have gone to home improvements and personal expenses." I wrote the number down. $187,000. The cost of Dana's wedding. Paid for with Eleanor's savings. Money that was supposed to be mine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at my kitchen table at 2:19 in the morning with a cold cup of coffee and felt a specific kind of clarity settle over me, the same clarity I feel when I look at a fraudulent document and understand precisely how it was constructed, and precisely how it will come apart. I called my mentor, James Whitfield, a retired probate judge. He listened to everything without interrupting. Then he said the 4 words I needed to hear: "You know what to do." He made a call to his contact in the North Carolina Attorney General's office that evening. They were interested. Very interested. My attorney, Denise Okafor, filed the initial documents with the probate court to contest the forged will. The AG's office opened a preliminary investigation. Harold provided his sworn statement. The handwriting expert submitted her report as official evidence. Priya provided the financial forensics summary. I had prepared a packet. 47 pages, tabbed and organized, the kind of document that is impossible to argue with because it argues with itself. Original will versus forged will. Expert report. Financial records. Timeline. For copies made, one for my attorney, one for the AG's office, one for the probate court. The fourth copy I slid into a manila envelope and put in my bag the morning of the wedding. What happened next, I had been preparing for 10 days. Stay with me. The Lakeview Country Club was exactly the kind of venue that costs $18,000 just to book. White columns, valet parking, a sweeping staircase inside the entrance designed specifically for brides to descend. Dana had talked about wanting something like this since she was 12 years old. And she got it. Every detail she had ever imagined, funded by money she didn't know had been stolen. I want to be clear about something. Dana didn't know. I am as certain of this as I am of anything. My sister was oblivious to the financial mechanics of her own wedding, the way people who have always been given things are often oblivious to where those things come from. She knew our parents were paying. She didn't ask questions. That's not a crime. It's the particular blindness of someone who has never had to fight for anything. In the 10 days between Harold's letter and the wedding, I moved quietly. Denise filed the initial legal documents. The AG's office opened their preliminary investigation. Harold's sworn statement was submitted. The handwriting expert's report was in the file. Priya's financial forensics were documented and certified. Everything was in motion. The trap was not something I had engineered. It was simply the truth, moving on its own timeline, and I was making sure nothing slowed it down. I prepared carefully the morning of the wedding. I wore the navy dress I keep for court appearances, simple, authoritative, the kind of garment that says, I am here with a purpose. I put on the small pearl earrings I had bought myself when I passed the bar. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I thought about Grandma Eleanor watching the herons on the water. I drove to the country club alone. The ceremony was beautiful. The flowers were spectacular, white peonies and garden roses cascading over every surface. A string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. Dana walked down the aisle on our father's arm, radiant in a cathedral-link silk and lace dress that I later learned had cost $8,400. My mother sat in the front row weeping the way she always wept at things involving Dana, fully, unself-consciously, as if her emotions were always both appropriate and on display. She looked genuinely happy. My father walked Dana down the aisle. Robert Merritt, who had always been better with spreadsheets than with people, who had looked at his own mother's will and seen an opportunity, who had taken $340,000 that Eleanor had carefully saved over 7 decades, the money she had specifically, in writing, set aside for me, and spent it on a party. I breathed in. I breathed out. I found my seat at table 7. At 3:45, I met Denise Okafor near the parking lot. She had driven up from Charlotte. She confirmed that Patricia Greer, the investigator from the AG's office, was already inside the venue, positioned near the reception hall entrance. The father of the bride toast was scheduled for 6 o'clock. That was our moment. Denise asked if I was sure. I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my professional life. If this story is hitting close to home, if you know what it feels like to be the invisible one, the one who was overlooked while someone else got the credit, you are not alone. Thousands of people have shared stories exactly like this in my comments. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. And tell me, what would you have done? The reception hall was everything $187,000 buys. 12 round tables in ivory linen, centerpieces of white roses and candlelight, a dance floor polished to a mirror finish. The chandelier above scattered light across 120 guests like a benediction. It was genuinely beautiful. It was paid for with money that belonged to me. I found my seat at table 7, the family table, though slightly removed from the head table where Dana and her new husband Marcus sat. My mother had placed me there with an aunt I barely knew and 2 of Dana's college friends. The seating arrangement communicated what it was designed to communicate, present but peripheral. Part of the event the way a coat check is part of the event. I sat down. I placed my bag on my lap. I waited. The dinner was served at 5 o'clock. I ate very little. I watched my parents move through the room. my father shaking hands, my mother accepting compliments on the flowers, both of them glowing with the satisfaction of people who have pulled something off. And they had pulled something off. They had funded a $187,000 wedding with stolen money, and not one person in this room knew. One person knew. At 5:52, I excused myself and found Denise near the edge of the room. She confirmed that Patricia Greer was in position near the main entrance. The venue manager had been briefed and had agreed to allow what was about to happen. He had been cooperative in the way people are cooperative when an attorney explains their options clearly. At 5:58, I sent Denise one word, ready. At 6 o'clock exactly, the best man handed my father the microphone. Robert Merritt stepped forward in his charcoal suit, looking like a man at the pinnacle of a happy life. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about Dana's childhood, the dance recitals, the volleyball, the way she lit up every room she walked into. He said watching her become the woman she was today had been the greatest privilege of his life. He looked at Marcus and said he couldn't have chosen a better man if he had tried. He raised his glass. He said he wanted to thank everyone who had contributed to making this day everything Dana deserved. That was when I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I walked through the reception hall at the same pace I walk into courtrooms, measured, deliberate, certain. The guests near me turned to look. I could feel the ripple of attention moving ahead of me. I said, "Dad, before we toast, I have something that belongs to you." He found me in the crowd. For a fraction of a second, something moved behind his eyes, recognition, calculation, a man who was good with numbers rapidly assessing variables. Then the professional smile came back. He said this wasn't the time. He asked warmly if we could talk later. He used his conciliatory voice, the one he kept for managing things. I said, "I think now is actually the right time." I reached into my bag. I removed the manila envelope. I walked to the head table. I placed it in front of him. I said, clearly enough for the tables around us to hear, "That's Grandma Eleanor's original will. The one she signed in September, 14 months before she died. The one that leaves everything to me." The room went quiet. Not all at once, first the tables nearest us, then spreading outward as people registered that something real was happening beneath the social surface. My mother's face had gone white. My father's smile had stiffened into something that resembled a smile the way a mask resembles a face. He said that wasn't what it was. He said I had misunderstood. He said Eleanor had updated her will. I said she did. In September, 3 years ago. Harold Stern witnessed it. He kept a certified copy for 34 years of practice. Here is the forensic handwriting analysis confirming that the signature on the will you filed with the probate court is inconsistent with Grandma Eleanor's known signature. I placed the second document beside the envelope. Here is Priya Anand's financial forensics report tracing $187,000 of Eleanor's estate funds directly to this wedding. The flowers, the venue, the dress, the catering, all of it paid for with my inheritance. My mother's voice came sharp and low. She said I was making a scene. She said this was Dana's day. She said whatever issues I had, we could discuss them as a family. I said, "This is a family issue." I looked at her steadily. "You were in the room when Grandma Eleanor told me the lake house was mine. You heard her say it. You were standing 3 feet away." My mother said nothing. Her hands, clasped on the table, were trembling. Dana had gone completely still. Her husband, Marcus, watched me with the careful expression of an accountant processing numbers in real time. I had always liked Marcus. My father attempted another approach. He lowered his voice to something conciliatory, designed to make me seem unreasonable by contrast. He said he understood I was grieving and that grief sometimes distorted our perceptions, but that Eleanor had been very specific in her final wishes. She was, I said. Harold Stern filed his sworn statement with the probate court 4 days ago. The Attorney General's office opened a preliminary investigation 3 days ago. I paused for exactly 2 seconds. Patricia Greer from the AG's office is currently standing near the entrance to this room. She has been here since 3:30. My father turned. He found Patricia Greer by the entrance, a composed woman in a dark jacket who gave a small, professional nod when his eyes landed on her. The color left my father's face. A woman at a nearby table set down her champagne glass. The room had the quality of a held breath. Someone near the back whispered something. The chandelier kept throwing its light across the tablecloths, indifferent and beautiful. My father said, in a very different voice than before, that this was a misunderstanding, that it could be sorted out, that there was no need for investigators. There was a need, I said. The moment you filed a forged will with the probate court, there was a need. The moment you liquidated $340,000 from an estate that belonged to me, there was a need. The moment you used my grandmother's savings, money she set aside for me, to pay for a wedding, there was a need. My mother began to cry. Not the performative tears from the ceremony. Something rawer and smaller from somewhere she didn't usually show. She said, "We didn't think I know," I said. I looked at her steadily. That's been true my entire life. Dana finally spoke. Her voice was very quiet and very controlled. She asked if what I was saying was true. I looked at my sister. I said, "Yes. I'm sorry, Dana." She turned to our parents. She asked how much of the wedding they had paid for with Grandma Eleanor's money. When neither of them answered immediately, she asked again, and this time her voice had an edge to it I had never heard before. My father said it was complicated, that the estate had been managed responsibly, that they had intended to discuss it with me at the appropriate time. Dana said, "How much?" My mother said, "Most of it." Almost inaudible. The word "most" landed in the room like something physical. Dana looked down at the table. She looked at the flowers, Eleanor's money. She looked at the ivory tablecloths, Eleanor's money. She touched the bodice of the dress she was wearing, Eleanor's money. I watched the moment she understood, and it looked like grief. I had not expected to feel sorry for her, but I did. Marcus put his hand over Dana's. She didn't look at him. She was looking at our parents with an expression I had never seen on her face, not anger yet, but something worse, the particular devastation of realizing that a beautiful thing has been built on something rotten. Patricia Greer had moved closer. She was not making an arrest, not tonight, not yet. She was there to observe, to document, to make the point that the process was already in motion and there was no closing that door. My father looked at me. For the first time in my memory, he looked at me the way you look at someone you underestimated. Not with admiration, with the dawning, uncomfortable recognition of someone who played a card they didn't know how to respond. He said, very quietly, "I didn't think you'd actually do anything." I said, "I know." I looked one more time at my mother. She was crying in earnest now, mascara tracking down her carefully made-up face. She had planned this day for months. She had stood in this room proud and radiant and certain. She had no idea that the daughter she had placed at table 7 had spent 10 days dismantling everything with the methodical precision of someone who does this for a living. I said, "The estate will be returned through the court process. I hope the rest of your evening is pleasant." I picked up my bag. I walked toward the door. My heels clicked on the polished hardwood, steady and unhurried. 120 people watched me leave. The chandelier threw its small rainbows across the floor ahead of me. I did not look back. I sat in my car in the parking lot for exactly 17 minutes. I know because I watched the dashboard clock. I didn't cry. I sat there and breathed and let the adrenaline of the past hour move through me and settle like sediment. I thought about Grandma Eleanor on her porch, the herons on the water, the way she had held my hand and said she had taken care of things. She had. And so had I. Denise called at 6:31. She said it had gone exactly as planned, and that Patricia Greer's preliminary notes confirmed the evidence was sufficient to support a formal investigation. She said to expect a call from the AG's office the following week. I thanked her. I drove home. The fallout came in waves. My mother called at 9 o'clock that night. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 9:17, at 9:32, at 10:05. The messages moved through different phases of the same storm: shock, indignation, grief, accusation. How could I do this to Dana on her wedding day? How could I involve lawyers in a family matter? How could I be so cold? I did not call back that night. My aunt called the next morning, my father's older sister, who had always been careful and quiet around family dynamics she suspected but never confirmed. She said she was sorry. She said Eleanor had always talked about me, about how much she wanted me to have the lake house, how important that had been to her. She said she was glad the truth was coming out, even if the timing was hard. That 2-minute phone call was more comfort than anything my parents had given me in years. Dana called on the third day. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she wasn't calling to fight. She said she had spent 3 days feeling sick, going back through every memory of the wedding and seeing my grandmother's money everywhere. She looked in the centerpieces, in the food, in the dress hanging in her closet. She said Marcus had been wonderful. She said she needed me to know she hadn't known. I told her I knew that. I had known all along. She asked how long I had suspected our parents of something like this. I said I had suspected something the moment they refused to show me the will. I just hadn't had proof until Harold's letter arrived. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said our parents had been treating me unfairly their entire lives, and she had let it happen because it was easier, and she was sorry for that too. Her voice was careful and deliberate, the voice of someone who had thought very hard about what they needed to say and was making themselves say it anyway. I told her that meant something to me. I told her it was a start. The legal process moved forward over the following months. My parents negotiated through their attorneys. They were not willing to put the question of forgery in front of a jury, which I understood. The probate court voided the filed will and restored the original. Legally, the estate was mine. Practically, the recovery was complicated. The lake house had been sold to a third party and could not be reclaimed. The cash had been substantially spent. After negotiations, my parents agreed to repay $380,000 over 5 years, using their home equity and retirement savings. The AG's office, satisfied with the civil resolution and the full repayment agreement, declined to pursue criminal charges. Their closing summary noted that the cooperation of the respondents had been a significant factor. The amount didn't feel entirely like justice. Eleanor's lake house was gone, and no settlement could give that back. But I had what Harold had wanted to give me when he sat down to write that letter on cream stationery, the truth on record. My grandmother's wishes honored. Her name cleared. I visited Harold Stern in Asheville 2 months after the wedding. He met me on the porch of his Victorian house with 2 glasses of sweet tea. We sat in the afternoon quiet and watched the light change over the mountains. He said Eleanor had told him in their last meeting that she worried the quiet ones in families always got overlooked. He said she had made him promise to make sure I got what was mine. I told him he had kept his promise. He said, with a small smile, that Eleanor had known from the time I was 10 years old that I would know exactly what to do when the moment came. I looked out at the mountains and thought about that small, sharp-eyed woman with her notebook and her sweet tea and her absolute, unshakable certainty about who I was. I did what you asked, Grandma. I paid attention. My name is Claire Merritt. I'm 33 years old. And that evening at the Lakeview Country Club was the last time I sat quietly while my family arranged the world as if I wasn't in it. I still have the certified copy of Eleanor's original will. I had it framed cream paper, blue ink, notary seal, and it hangs in my office between my law degree and my bar certificate. Harold made me a print of it when I told him what I was planning to do with it. He said Eleanor would have appreciated the theatrical choice. I think she would have. Here's what I want to say to you if you're still watching. The hardest thing about being the overlooked one is not the individual moments of being passed over, as painful as those are. It's the accumulation. The way each small dismissal builds on the last until you begin to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you're less. Maybe you're extra. Maybe the family hierarchy that placed you at the bottom knew something true about your worth that you've been too stubborn to accept. They don't. What I have learned, as a daughter, as a sister, as an attorney who has sat across the table from dozens of families in conflict, is that the people who dismiss you are almost never seeing you clearly. They're seeing their own convenience reflected back. They overlook you not because you are small, but because looking carefully at you would require them to look carefully at themselves. And that is harder than they want to work. My grandmother saw me clearly. Harold Stern saw me clearly. And eventually, through a process that was painful for everyone involved, my family was forced to see me clearly too. My father called me 6 months after the settlement. It was a brief call. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he had not understood the scale of what he had done until the legal process forced him to sit with it. He said he was sorry. His voice was quiet and older sounding than I remembered. I said I heard him. I said we would take it day by day. I meant it. My mother started therapy. Dana told me this. I don't know what they discuss in those sessions. I don't need to. Dana and I have lunch once a month now. Real lunches, where we talk about things that matter. Last month she told me something she had been carrying since childhood, that she had always known, somewhere underneath everything, that I was the stronger one. That she had let herself be used as a measuring stick because it was easier than examining what was actually happening. She said she was working on it. I told her that was enough for me. There's a young woman who started at my firm this year, fresh out of law school, first in her family to get a degree, the kind of person who double-checks everything and apologizes for taking up space. I recognized her immediately. I invited her to sit at the main conference table during a partners' meeting, and I watched the same thing happen that always happens, the flicker of surprise in her eyes, the instinctive question of whether she was actually allowed to be there. I told her afterward, take up the space. You earned it. You keep earning it every day. She reminded me of myself at 24. She reminded me of Eleanor telling me not to let them make me small. If you're watching this and you know what it feels like to be the one who got the 2 mismatched candles, who got told to wait, who got the second best version of everything, who was handed less and expected to be grateful, I want you to hear this. The things people denied you don't shrink you. They are not evidence of your worth. They are evidence of theirs. Silence is not peace. It is just postponed clarity. And you were never nobody. They were just not paying attention. If this story spoke to you, please leave a comment. Tell me, what boundary changed your life? What moment made you realize you were worth standing up for? I read every single message. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. There are more stories to tell. Take care of yourself. Really, I mean it.